Hi, folks. So starting off matting here, we want to start with our artwork size. And we need to know our artwork size, we need to know our frame size, and then we need to figure out our window from there. So I'm going to be using for demo today this cyanotype that I have, and I'm going to be matting it two ways. So this is, I think, a 9 by 12 piece of paper, and I'm going to be putting this into an 11 by 14 frame. So 11 by 14 frame for this artwork is the first thing I need to know. That is my mat size. That's my art. That's what the artwork size is going to be. Typically, when matting, you want to have at least an inch, if not wider, all the way around your artwork and what the imagery is. So make sure to plan and adjust your frame size for that. Okay, so but first I'm going to cut down my mat board. You should be using acid-free mat board for this, especially if it's going to be in a long storage or in the frame for a long time. If it's not archival, if there's acids that could end up you can get some foxing. That's called. You get these little marks on your paper, and you always want to identify which side is the front, which side is the back of your mat. And you'll see one side has a bit of a texture, one side's a bit smoother. There we go. Also, you always make sure to have clean hands that are freshly washed and that you have a nice clean surface to work on. Any scratch, any little dust will show on the front of your mat. So always make sure it's really, really clean. I'm actually going to put a piece of newsprint down on my cutting mat just to make sure that there's no dirt or anything on here. All right. So I'm going to cut I'm working on the back of my mat. So what's side facing up is the back. The good side that'll be facing out is on the bottom. So I'm going to cut this for my mat size. So this is going to be 11 by 14. And you should only be using pencil when doing this too, folks. So just make a mark at 14 at the top, make a mark at 14 on the bottom. Now I'm left-handed, so typically I hold with my right hand and I cut with my left. As you folks see, this is the side that we want to keep, and this right side here is the stuff that we don't want to keep. It's always good practice that you put whatever your scrap is, right, the part that you don't care about, put that to your cutting side instead of your ruler side. Because when I cut, if I slip, I'm going to slip into the part I don't want, as opposed to slipping in the part that I do want. So always make sure that your good side is underneath your ruler and the scrap is on your cutting side. I'm just going to push this over a little bit here. All right, so we're going to blend up my 2 points. I'm using a really sharp box cutter. A dull knife is a dangerous knife. Make sure you have a nice sharp knife. And my first cut here is just to make a groove. I'm not trying to cut through the mat board all in one slice. I'm going to do actually a couple passes. Whenever you're cutting thick materials, never try to go through it all in one go. Always do 2 or 3 passes, and a sharp knife should drag itself through. And this should be able to just fall away on its own. Hold on to that scrap. We'll be needing it later when it comes to cutting the window. All right, so I've done the 14. Now I'm going to do the 11. Again, my scrap is facing out away, so in case I slip, I'll cut into the scrap. There you go. And it just fell right away. All right, so now we have our mat cut to the size of our frame. It's actually the same size as our artwork here. So, all right. So for prepping this for putting our window, we always want to make sure that our window is directly in the middle of our mat. So I'm going to make a couple marks on the back here, and I'm going to start by just finding the halfway points. So I'm going to do, so half of 14 is 7. I'm going to mark 7 and 7, and I'm going to draw this center line. And I'm using a mechanical pencil. You should be using a sharp pencil, a thin pencil as well. The smaller, sharper your lines are, the more precise this will become, as you folks can see. All right, and then I'm just going to repeat that. So I'm just kind of making a crosshair here. And this is going to be useful for measuring off of the center. Half of 11 is 5.5. Okay. There we are. So let's talk about our window opening. There are two ways, I think, to cut a basic window opening. You can cut with the window going up to the image area, where you just see the image area and then you see mat. And then there's another way of you leave a bit of a border. So in this case, I might leave, say, a 1/4 inch border all the way around my mat as well. And those are going to be two different measurements. And they both have different looking effects. I'm going to cut both mats as well today. So I'll be cutting two mats to show you folks the difference here. All right, so let's measure our artwork. So we're going to make our first mat to fit our imagery. All right, first mat's going to be to fit our imagery. So I'm going to measure across here. My image is 9 7/8, almost 10 inches, not quite. I want to cut that in about 1/8 of an inch on either side. So I'm going to subtract a 1/4 inch. So I want to go in to 9 5/8 is going to be my opening. I don't want to go exactly the size of my width and height, because then it's going to be really hard to actually get my artwork lined in. So I'm just going to be trimming off 1/8 of an inch on there. So 9 5/8 is going to be my goal. So half of 9 5/8 is what, 5/16. So 9 4 5. Sorry, folks, just doing a little bit of math here. So that means I'm going to go 4 and what's that? And 11 16ths. Let me just mark that real quick and double check that math. That is right. All right, so I'm going to mark that on the bottom. Sorry, my big old head's getting in the way. All right, now I'm actually going to draw that line in there. And because we're going to be cutting this mat by hand, we do want to see that whole line in there. So these lines become useful later. All right, so we're done that width, which should be cutting off 1/8 on either side. Then we're going to do the height, which I am at 7 1/4. So then I'm going to do 7 inches opening, cutting off that 1/8 of an inch either way. So That's pretty easy. That's just 3.5 inches. Not so bad on the math there. I'm gonna mark 3.5 on either side, at the top and bottom. There we go. So our mat should now look like this, as you folks can see. So you want to pay attention to where you're at. So we're going to be following this line here, but it is useful to have all those lines going off. Okay. So I'm going to go all the way through cutting this mat, and then I'm going to do the other mat after this, just so you folks don't get confused with the numbers and the math and everything. All right, so here is my mat cutter. And we have, so this is our guide. This is our actual mat cutter here for you folks to see. It does have a blade in here that when I press down, it cuts through, but it's cutting at an angle. So it's cutting at a 45-degree angle, which you always want to see that. Another thing you want to see on here, folks, is on this bevel cutter, there is this little center line as well. This becomes really important when we're cutting. Okay? Yeah. So we need our mat cutter. We need our bevel cutter with a nice, I have a brand new sharp blade in there as well. We need the mat that we figured out, and we also need some scrap mat too. Whenever you're cutting on a mat cutter like this, you always need some scrap underneath your mat. All right, so I'm going to start this in. So I'm going to start by doing this horizontal cut first, and I am going to put this underneath there with the scrap mat underneath, and I'm going to line up along this edge. I'm actually lining my pencil mark up along the edge of the mat here, just like a roller. And there's little feet on the edge of this track so that my mat cutter actually locks in to place. All right, so I'm going to zoom in here because it might be hard for you folks to see. Okay. So it's hard for you to see, but this is the line that is on the bevel cutter. This is the line that we use to line up with where we start our cut. That line is actually not very thick. It's maybe, like a millimeter, half a millimeter in width. One thing that tends to happen when cutting a mat is we tend to undercut if we start lining things up exactly on this edge. So I know even though that line is really, really tiny, there is like an inside and an outside of that line. So I'm actually going to line it up so that the outside of the line is facing the just beginning of where my mat starts. My line starts there. So I've lined that up. So I'm going to use my hand here. I'm actually pressing down quite a bit on the mat cutter on the guide here. And then I'm going to push this down so it's going to start cutting all the way through my mat. So that's pushed all the way down. We want to make sure that we hold that down all the way through. So then I'm just going to use my thumb and I'm just going to push this along. And you go really, really slow towards the end here. So we're going to line this up with our line on the other side. And I'm going to push it just so that that edge of that line goes just to the outside of my pencil mark. All right, and then we're going to lift, pull that away. That might be hard for you folks to see, but it did cut. So then I usually work clockwise or counterclockwise. And as I cut, I'm putting a small little cut into my scrap underneath here. You might not be able to see. But there is a cut here. So I'm always kind of putting a new piece of scrap underneath my new cut. You don't want to overcut on old cuts underneath on your scrap because it could end up getting you wavy lines. So I'm moving my scrap. I'm going to rotate my mat 90 degrees, line up on that pencil edge, find that center point going a little bit to the outside, and I'm going to go get a little bit to the outside on that side when I cut. Push that all the way down. Make sure you really push it down so it doesn't go down any further, and I'm holding down the mat so it doesn't slide on me. Go really, really slow. It's easy to slip at the end. Lift that up, pull it off. There we go. We should have a nice clean fall away like that. And I'm going to push my scrap mat up a little bit more, turn my mat 90 degrees. And we're just going to do that for the next two edges. And hopefully, if we did this correct, there we go. It just fell right out of the way. So you can see we have a nice, beautiful bevel cut all the way around. Whenever we're cutting mat, we always want a bevel cut. We never have straight up and down 90-degree cuts. The bevel is the standard ideal, especially for gallery and museum framing. All right, let me pull this out a little bit. Oop. Okay, so here's mat 1. That looks pretty good. We still have this little scrap here. If you're making any more, if you have really small frames, you can hold on to this. Otherwise, you can recycle it. If we see if I line this up with my artwork, again, I'm trimming off just like a little bit on the sides. But does that look good? It's nice. We're going to talk about finishing and framing here for a little bit. So this is, the most standard sort of mat that you can cut. Just a basic window mat that goes to the artwork. But I really like that blue edge I have on the cyanotype. I really want to accentuate that. So I'm going to actually cut the next mat a little bit thinner or a little bit bigger of a window mat so we can actually see that nice edge around there. So I'm going to repeat this process again. So I'll set this mat off to the side. I'm going to push this back. All right, so let's go back to the artwork because now our image size is going to change. Our image size is going to be bigger than our actual artwork size now. I'll use this scrap to help me. So what did I say? This was 9 7/8. I want to add, I don't know. I'm trying to think. I'm going to add 1/4 of an inch to this, folks. So I'm going to add a 1/2 inch overall. What's going on? So that should be 10 1/8 wide on either side. Now, obviously, math is a bit more complicated when you have differently sized artwork like this, but just take your time, go slow, measure twice. I have a lot of experience doing matting and framing, so working with eighths and sixteenths and quarters aren't that scary for me anymore. All right, so we're going to do that for the width. The height I said was 7 1/4. So we'll just take that to 7 3/4 in height. So we have our measurements. We have our mat. This is the back of the mat on this one. As you can see, there's just a little scrap mat that I have. Typically, the back of your mat will look a little bit different as well. Here is the lot number for it. You can see that the front, this is a nice front side on it. So we're going to start as before. All right, we're going to do our crosshair right in the middle. If you folks find that you have a mat that you can't tell which side is the front and which side is the back, it's most likely a double-sided mat, so it doesn't really matter. Just choose the side that's the cleanest and nicest. Okay. So we got our crosshair. So let's do our width. So our total width is 10 1/8. That's going to be 5 1/16 as our halfway. So 5 1/16 this way, 10 1/8 that way. Let me just double check that just to make sure that I'm thinking right. Yep. All right. Didn't quite draw a full line there. All right, so we got 7 3/4. So we need to split that in half. What's that going to be? 1, 2, 3, 4, 12. So 3 1/2, 6. So 3 7/8 on one side, 3 7/8 on the other side. No pressure like doing math live for y'all. Yep, that's right. Or close enough at least. There we are. So we're just going to repeat the process of cutting our mat just like we did before. Flip that around. last one. And we just pull this away nice and clean. There we are. Pull that out. So now we have, I want to line this up fairly close. We have this beautiful little blue edge now going around our artwork, which I really like the look of this personally. So this is usually my ideal that I'm going to go for. If you just have white borders, then there's usually no need to have white edges. But I like having this little black border around there. It looks like it almost has two mats. So yeah, this is good. So again, we have just a window mat with a little bit opening. Then we have our window mat that's cut to our artwork. And that's usually half the battle. And I would say like a little mat setup like this, mat cutting setup, typically about $100. Like this is pretty long. I can do a 36-inch wide print. You can get the 36-inch wide mat. You can get these pretty small. 24 inches I think is a pretty good size for you folks to have if you want to buy your own. But they last for years. It's really an investment. This mat cutter is like 30 years old. And we're still using it. It still works great. We change the blades out every once in a while. So usually if you buy a mat cutter once and you take care of it, you never have to worry about buying another one again. Okay. So let me just set these things off to the side. Now that we're done with them. Hi folks, welcome back. So we've cut our two mats. And so one last step is we want to actually attach our artwork to our mat. We want to attach it with hinge tape. So there are specific acid-free hinge tapes to buy. There's a lot out there. This one is just so happens to be an Abaca hinge tape, but it doesn't really matter. As long as it's acid-free, as long as it's meant for framing and matting, you can get whatever you would like. They even have a little illustration on the back of the box on how to hinge mat, which is what I'll be doing a version of today for you folks. So here it is. I'm gonna get a couple of nice pieces. I'm gonna need probably 4 2-inch-ish, inch and a half pieces for this size frame. I'm just gonna put this back in its box as it's unrolling on me. All right, so I'm going to be using the wider mat here. And it can be difficult at times to kind of figure out what the right, spacing, because I want this blue border to be really nice and even along. So it's easy to do it here, then flip it over. Things may shift around or whatnot. And obviously my artwork may not be exactly printed in the exact middle of this paper either. So one trick I'm going to use a little bit of just blue painter's tape here to just temporarily hold my print in place while I get it lined up. You never want to frame and leave tape like this because it does have acid on it. This will ruin your artwork over time. But I'm going to get a fresh piece and take a little bit of the tack off so it's not really that tacky. I'm going to put it on sort of the long edges here. Just loosely. So that's on there, and I'm just going to go back through. And I'm going to line this up again the way I want to. This little hack has just been like the quickest way I found without, doing too much measuring, making it easier on myself. And I'm just going to eyeball that. That looks pretty good. All right, so when that looks pretty good, I'm going to push down. As you can see, I got my little blue tails sticking out here. I'm going to push down on that. So in that way, that helps me lift everything up and away. So I can flip this over. So this is the top edge of my artwork up here. This is where I'm going to hinge mat at. And my paper and my mat are actually pretty close in size, so this is gonna be a little bit of a tight squeeze, and I'm going to actually take this down a little bit. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to. So there's a thin backing paper on this. It can be difficult, but I'm going to separate them. There we go. All right, so I'm going to put down this tape a little bit in from this corner here, a little bit on that edge, and tape that down really well and let it be here. I'm then going to reinforce that with a smaller piece of hinge tape. So it can be difficult to separate the backing from the abaca sometimes. All right, and then that is going to go butt up against the artwork and across that first hinge. So as you folks can see, it's not on the artwork, it's on the mat, but it's right up against that edge there. And for an artwork so small as this, I can get away with just doing two. If I have a bigger artwork, I would probably maybe do an edge, a middle, and another edge. But for the sake of time today, I'm just going to do two. All right, that is nice and adhered. Again, if you have more mat spacing, you don't have to cut your hinge, your abaca down as much as I did. Oh boy, come on. There we go. All right, there we are. So obviously you can move these scraps out of the way. You want to take off that blue tape. So with that, it is now, the artwork is now hinged to the mat if we ever need to release it. Because it is acid-free, you should actually be able to get a clean, damp sponge and put that on here, and it should actually be able to roll right off if you ever need to remove it. But it is safe to be on here. And that's also a reason why I like having nice big borders on my printing paper around my mat. So whenever there's tape, the tape is never over where the imagery will be. So say in 100 or so years, if it starts to sort of look crappy underneath where the tape is or somehow bleed through and damage the paper, the artwork is still safe. All right. Always a good idea at this point to, sign your artwork as well. Put some information on the back of there. But that looks pretty good. So once we have our window mat cut, once we have our artwork hinge taped to it, we're ready to go for framing. And I'm going to be moving to a different piece of artwork as well that I have to rehang. All right, folks, so here is a print that I've made. You've also seen a photo, you've seen a print. And I have it hinge taped to the back of this mat. As you can see, I have it signed and everything on the back there. So just as before. And as you can see with this matting, I've gone with a nice, healthy half-inch border all the way around the artwork itself. All right. So same as this. So once we're at this point, we also want to get a backing board as well. So this is some acid-free foam core that I got from a framing supply shop. If you can only find, sorry, focusing is hard. If you can only find regular foam core, you can get a nice piece of acid-free artwork paper, like so print paper, watercolor paper, or acid-free drawing paper. You can use that in between the sandwich in between your artwork and the backing board. So we have our mat, our artwork, our backing board. We might even have an acid-free barrier in between the artwork and the backing board too. The last thing I'm going to need on this is I'm going to need some glazing. So I'm going to glaze with just some plexiglass that I got from the hardware store. And that's another reason why having a mat is important. You never want to have your artwork directly against whatever your glazing is, whether that be glass, whether that be plexiglass. That's going to damage your artwork over time because those, at least plexiglass is petroleum based product, so oil-based product. If you folks are showing in galleries or museums or you need to ship your artwork, you want to be framing with plastic, with plexi. You do not want to be framing with glass. That's usually a standard requirement by most galleries or museums these days. So I need to cut a piece of plexiglass down. I'm going to show you folks how to do that. So here is an 18 by 24 piece of optics brand. You can just get this at your hardware store, local hardware store. And I'm going to cut this down. So my artwork is 14 inches by 24 inches. So the 24 inches here is already perfect. I just need to cut 2 inches off of this. So it goes from being, 16 to 14. Or wait, yeah. But just in case, you should always double check with a ruler too to make sure. I'm going to do that right now. Yep, 14 inches by 24 inches. So cutting plexiglass can be a bit difficult, and you're going to need a special tool for it as well. So I'm going to mark 14 inches there. I'm going to mark 14 inches at the bottom. You want to work on a nice table too, and on the edge of the table as well. So it's going to be hard for you folks to see. Let me pull out here a little bit on this side cam. So I'm actually moving my artwork, or I'm moving this off to the side a little bit so that the edge of the plexiglass is coming off at the edge of the table here. That's important so I don't damage the table I'm working on, which I'll show you in a second of why that's important. So to cut plexiglass, you're going to need what's called a draw knife. They usually sell this by the plexiglass section at Lowe's or Home Depot or Ace, a draw knife. And you can see this has a hooked end to it, this hooked blade. And it's called a draw knife because we draw towards ourselves with it, which can be kind of dangerous. And it's going to require a bit of force. So I will actually line up this heavy-duty ruler on that. And to help me out, I'm going to actually clamp it down to my table with a little clamp, just to help hold this in place. All right, so with my draw knife, you folks are having trouble seeing there. So with my draw knife, I'm going to pull this down towards myself. I've got my clamp helping to hold the bottom in place. I'm going to hold the top in place, make sure I'm lined up with my 14 inches. And your first draw is always just to make a groove to fall in, and I'm pulling off the edge of the table here. And it's making that lovely sound. And I'm actually making little burrs of plastic coming off here. So I'm going to draw this probably 5-6 times. And so I'm not actually going to try and cut through the plexiglass. I'm trying to score about halfway down through there. Yeah. So as you folks can see, I am pulling up a bunch of plastic. I know that's such a great sound too. Okay, so that should be pretty good. Well, actually, so as you folks see, my tear here is pretty small. I have a really small tear. I do want to cut a little bit deeper on small edges. If this was a much bigger piece of plexiglass, and say I had like a hole like 6 or 7 inches, I'm busting off the other end here. You can go a little shallower, but just make sure you have a really nice, precise break. All right, that's pretty good. Better safe than sorry, though. Plexiglass is not cheap. I've found the best place for plexiglass here locally in BG is actually Ace Hardware. It typically has the best deals for it. All right, so I have this nice bevel line going all the way through, and it is actually going off of the edge. And if you were to look at that very edge, and it might be hard to see on camera here, but it does go about halfway through the thickness of here. The only thing is this far edge that I was cutting, I didn't really get a good chance to catch. So I'm going to just real quick sort of counter score that on this side. So just the very end, just pulling off that last bit of ½ inch. Okay. So then you want to put your plexiglass on the edge of your table, and the sharper the edge of the table, the better. This table isn't that terribly sharp, so I hope this works. But I'm just going to hold it down. I'm going to let the part that I scored, I'm going to let it hover off of the table just a little bit, and then with one motion, I should just be able to break it. See that, folks? Just a nice, clean break from top to bottom. I can then get my box cutter and cut that away. Cutting plexiglass isn't as bad or scary as you think. The sound is a bit annoying, I will admit, but otherwise it's pretty agreeable. Okay, there we go. So now we've got our plexiglass cut. We got everything ready to go. It's going to be time to assemble our frame. So let me just reset my area here. Whenever I'm assembling my artwork, I really make sure to clean everything up really well. The less dirt and dust and scraps you have around, the easier the framing part will be. All right, let me readjust this camera. So folks, we're going to talk about a sectional frame. I really like sectional frames. They're nice, they're metal, they last many years. They're also customizable. You can take them apart and put them together yourself. So if you work within a couple standard size frames, you can always have frames to use. So I bought these from American Frame. This is just their white standard plus molding that I have here. Really thin border. I'm really into white frames at the moment, but when you choose a molding for your artwork, again, if you're showing in a gallery or museum, go with a really basic profile. So again, the profile is this look here, the top part, very basic. This is just has a little bit of a rounded edge to it. And also go with, a pretty neutral color. So white, black, they make a gunmetal, gray. You could also go with wood frames as well, but a natural wood frame or a painted wood frame, all looks good. Again, your frame should be about accentuating and elevating the artwork. You don't want to pull attention away from the artwork because of the way that you're framing it. So the way that we use these sectionals, so this is the front edge that we see. We're going to turn it over to the back here when we have this channel. So I'm just going to lay out the way that my frame should go together. There we go. In there, in your kit that you usually get when you buy these, you're going to have several metal pieces. You have a metal piece that has two little screws on it, and then you should have a flat one. These marry together, and these become your corners. These are what lock in your corners. So here's your channel. You put in both pieces, a flat piece on the bottom, a part with the screws facing on top, and this lets you sort of join your edges together. This is me putting together this frame for a second time. There will usually come these are little foam pads. I put these on the bottom of my artwork, so when it's up against the wall, it doesn't scratch the wall. But that's why there's little black squares on these corner joints. So cool. So when you folks are buying metal sectionals, you can buy them by the width or the height or the length and whatever it is. You know what I'm talking about. And they always sell them in pairs. So as long as you have the same molding, the same style, you can always mix and match that you have with these. And then I just need a screwdriver. Basic screwdriver. And I'm going to square up these edges. So I want to make sure that everything sits nice. Focus. All right, so as you folks can see, when they come together, I want these metal edges to actually sit really nice and flush. I also look at this edge too, along the thickness, and make sure that it's being lined up as well. And then I'm going to tighten those screws. And I'm not going to tighten them too tight. I'm just going to tighten them to the point that they start staying together, and I'm going to tighten them really tight at the very end. But I'm usually going pretty loose here to start with. Lining up those corners, checking that seam here, making sure that that seam is lined up all the way through its thickness. And I'm just going to loosely tighten these up. Double check this one. There we go. All right, we're going to go to the bottom of the artwork and do the same. However, I'm going to leave the bottom a little bit looser. I will tighten this one a little bit tighter. We're going to leave this one a little bit looser because we're going to be inserting our artwork from the bottom of our frame. Okay, here we go. That's all together. As you can see, that looks pretty nice. Again, I've left that bottom on the loose side so I can actually slide it out. Here we go. So frames together, we've got our glazing, got everything ready to go. So one big annoyance, folks, is dust and dirt while you're framing. So again, now is a good time to make sure you don't have any dust or dirt or blow things off on here. If you have any canned air, or if you're in a frame strip, you have like some compressed air. That's great. I dusted this before, so it's looking pretty good. Now on this plexiglass, you can see it's a little bit hazy because there is protective film on both sides, just to prevent it from scratching, because plexiglass does scratch really easily. But when you pull this film off, it makes it a lot of static electric, and dirt is just magnetized right to this glass. So I take this off at the very end really quickly. So I'll do one side, and then I'll immediately lay this face down on my artwork. And hopefully if you have if you already have a clean working area and a clean room that's not too dusty, you shouldn't have any dust underneath your glazing. And then I'll take off, while it's on top of the artwork, I'll take off the facing. All right, so before we insert this into our frame, now is the time that we inspect and look for dust and dirt and get rid of anything. And it's looking pretty good to me, or at least good enough for government work right now for this demo. All right, so again, we have our sandwich here, folks. I have my foam core, my acid-free foam core. I've got my artwork on the mat board and my glazing, my plexiglass on top. And I should just be able to line this up and insert this right into my frame. And then I'm going to put the bottom on. Well, this might be a little bit difficult. Ooh, I see a little piece of dirt. Okay, got it. The worst thing is getting a whole frame together and then realizing you have dirt in there. All right, so as you're into that, I'm actually picking up, you might be able to see the shadow, I'm actually picking up the plexiglass so I can push this in all the way. There we go. All right, once that's in all the way, check for dirt one more time. Looks pretty good. All right, and now I'm going to tighten up all these screws, making sure that the corners are lined up and clean and are matching with each other. All right, almost done, folks. We're in the finishing stages. So we've done the matting and framing. Now we got to do the finishing. So we want to make sure that this mat is held down really nice and tight to the back of our frame. And so you'll be given these springs with your kit. And these springs, they do flex. And so they actually act as a weight to hold things in down here. So I'm going to push this in. I'm going to push it down all the way and just slide it in the gap between the molding and the foam core. So I usually start in the center on the long side, and I'm going to put two on the edges here, catty corner from each other. And then I'm going to just fill in everything else. So I'm going to put 3 on this long side. I'm going to put 2 on the short side here. So even, this is a pretty average sized frame piece of artwork. I'm still using, quite a few. Is this one weird shaped? Oh, why is that one not going there? There we go. All right. There we go. So now that's holding everything nice and taut in there. Looking good. And that helps flatten everything out on here as well. So just for a long piece like this, where we might not have as much pressure along these long sides, it's really holding everything in nice and together. We got one more step, folks, and that is putting our framing wire on. So in your kit, you'll be given little another piece of metal like this. It has another screw on it. This is for our framing wire. Make sure which size is the top. So here's the top. And I'm pretty particular when it comes to putting my framing wire in here. I'm actually going to measure about 6 inches down. Where'd my pencil go? Oh, I can see. But I'm going to measure 6 inches from the top of the mat. Make a little mark. And these little suckers kind of like notch in, and they slide up and down through your molding. I usually, whenever I'm putting my framing on, I usually go in the upper third of whatever it is. I don't want to put it right at the middle because then it could hang weird. So upper third, if not the top quarter quadrant of whatever your frame is. So I'm going to line that up with my 6-inch mark. And I'm just going to screw that into place. And this little set screw will hold everything down nice and well. All right, so that's on here. Now, last bit is framing wire. You do want to have a nice braided framing wire. Even if you have plastic coating on it, it's even better. I'm reusing my framing wire from before, so we're going to see how well I can do this. But you can tell a lot about an artist by the way that they wrap their framing wire, believe it or not. There's a wrong way and a right way. There's a messy way, and there's a clean way to do it. And so normally I have a piece that's a little bit longer than this. Let's say maybe like 5 or 6 inches longer than what I need. You're going to start by coming up and underneath your opening here. And when you fold, I'm going to zoom in. So I'm going to fold this over. And when you wrap this, folks, wrap it and pull it nice and tight to the edge there. So then as you start wrapping this around, you should wrap around 5 to 7 times. You have a really nice, clean looking wrapping. This is something they teach you in framing school. Yes, I went to framing school. All right, and then any little extra here, you should twist it around if it comes undone and face it downward, not upward. But you see how nice and clean that is, folks? That's what you want. Little things like this will tell you about the professionalism of the artist that you're dealing with or working with in a gallery. I typically don't like to have a lot, because I'm typically hanging prints and photos. I typically don't have a lot of like slack in my artwork. But here's the crucial part. When you come to the other side, This is where I pull it taut, so almost like a bass string, and then I fold it over, right? And this, having a nice taut string, hanging wire in the back there, I think looks really nice. It actually makes framing that much easier, because when you're hanging in the gallery and you're thinking about the space from here to here, if you have a lot of slack, it makes it more difficult to do the math to figure out how to frame it. So from my experience, hanging in galleries, they like a more taut framing wire. Again, nice tight wiring there. So we got our wire. Lastly, I might add my name. So the information I have on the back of my print, right? Like the edition or my name, the title, I'll probably write here. And I might even might slide in one of my business cards in here too. So that way, and even maybe my phone number or email. So when I'm sending this artwork out, there's always contact information on the artwork itself, especially if you're sending in more than one piece. It's good to have the title of the piece on the back of your artwork too. But here we are. Beautiful gallery framing, ready to go with plexiglass and wire. Do something like this, you can be all set, folks. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed.